You are listening to Film vs. Analytics, a Fantasy Points podcast where each day we discuss a new rookie based on the Dynasty ADP, battling them out film versus analytics. I am your host, Brett Whitefield, the film expert. I will be joined by Scott Barrett, the analytics GOAT. We are Fantasy Points.
What?
Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
Scott, how are you, sir?
I'm doing good, man. How are you?
I'm doing good. Today, we're talking Emeka Egbuka, Ohio State wide receiver. Let's get after it, man. Come on.
All right. Emeka Egbuka.
Emeka. Yep.
He was the number one rated wide receiver recruit in the 2021 class unanimously. I usually don't spend too much time on high school stats, but as a high school junior, 83 catches, over 1,600 yards, 25 receiving touchdowns, also 4 rushing touchdowns, 3 punt return touchdowns, 2 pick 6 touchdowns on defense, 8 total interceptions. Was crazy in high school. Then goes to Ohio State as an 18-year-old true freshman. Didn't really do much besides special teams. But to be fair, he was buried behind Jackson Smith and Jigba, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr. So that's a little understandable. We can excuse that, sort of late breakout, but it wasn't too much of a late breakout because the following season, Olave and Wilson were in the pros. JSN was hurt, limited to only 3 games. Egbuka broke out in a major way, 74 catches, 1,151 yards, 10 touchdowns through 13 games. It was second best on the team. Marvin Harrison Jr. had 112 more yards, but it was the 5th most receiving yards in the Power 5, the 3rd most in Ohio State history at the time, 3.01 yards per route run, ranked 5th best single season of any Power Conference wide receiver in this year's class, behind only 2 seasons from Trey Harris, 1 season from Tez Johnson, and 1 season from Luther Burden, all slot guys. Again, crazy numbers for Ohio State, maybe not the craziest. It ranks 9th best since 2017. Couple Chris Olave seasons, couple Marvin Harrison Jr. seasons, JSN season, Jeremiah Smith last year, Paris Campbell was on there ahead of him. But yeah, really good year. Model really liked that. Then the following season, it wasn't great. He sort of fell off of a cliff. He had nearly half as many receiving yards per game as Marvin Harrison Jr. He did suffer an ankle injury in week 6. But even if I want to be as generous as possible to kind of account for that injury, it was still really a disappointing year. And then last year, it was somewhere in between his 2nd and 3rd seasons. Ohio State, hey, they won the national championship. He had over 1,000 yards again, but through 16 games, it was just 63 yards per game. 18-year-old true freshman Jeremiah Smith had 300 additional yards on only 14 extra routes. But hey, we can't really hold that against him. Jeremiah Smith, according to Dane Brugler, would be the first overall pick in this year's class. Apparently he's Julio Jones reincarnated. And then he was also more productive than Carnell Tate, the team's wide receiver 3. Right now, he's the consensus wide receiver 1 of next year's class, projected top 5 overall pick. And so I was sort of weighing all this 2 different ways. Hey, this guy ranks top 3 in the class in career yards per route run, top 3 in career first downs per route run, ahead of Tent McMillan in both categories. He did this despite the toughest target competition in the class. But on the other hand, you could say he's a slot only wide receiver who never led his team in receiving yards. He's also a non-early declare with only 1 truly impressive season. And so analytically, digging into 73% of his career routes have come from the slot, by the way. But yeah, so analytically, digging into it, he reminded me a bit of Jarvis Landry, a bit of Amon-Ra St. Brown, both guys who had an impressive age-adjusted yards per team pass attempt despite elite target competition. But digging deeper, I found an interesting wart that Egbuka carries that I think hints at suspect upside and would put him alongside a few less sexy cohorts. Paris Campbell's name was invoked 3 times in my write up, totally organically. But basically, in short, it's that Egbuka offers basically no vertical element to his game. He averaged just 10.1 career yards per game on deep targets. That would easily be the lowest figure of any round 1 wide receiver in at least a decade. If we included round 2 wide receivers, it would be behind only Paris Campbell and Curtis Samuel, who was really more of a running back in college. Just 16.6% of his career receiving yards have come on deep passes among all round 1 through 3 wide receivers. It's behind only Paris Campbell. And you look at the names on this list, it's really gross. It's Rondale Moore, it's Zay Jones, it's Sky Moore, it's Velus Jones Jr., it's Malachi Corley. And so really this was my big wart for him, was maybe suspect upside. Maybe he's just really slot only. In the mold of a Rondale Moore, who doesn't really offer much of a vertical element, but apparently offered more than Rondale Moore. And so this is where I came in at him. You know, I could argue it both ways. Wasn't extremely impressive to me. You know, I kind of have a bias against slot wide receivers as well. But I'd love to know if your tape showed similar things, and how are you viewing Egbuka?
Yeah, this is supposed to be film versus analytics, but it's kind of more like film and analytics for this one because I think we see a lot of the same things.
And we haven't talked about him yet.
No, not. I don't think it at all. Like I don't even think I've even mentioned his name to you at any
No.
given point in time. Here's the thing with Egbuka. Everything you just said is true, and I'm going to paint maybe a better picture of him slightly, but his career trajectory at Ohio State kind of perfectly encapsulates what he is: a really high floor wide receiver too. He
Yeah.
was always second fiddle to whoever was on the team, whether that was Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, whether that was Marvin Harrison Jr. and JSN, or whether that was Jeremiah Smith. He was always second fiddle, and I think that's his role in the NFL as a high floor, low ceiling, power slot type guy. He reminds me a ton of Rashee Rice. That's my working comp for him, where he is a very physical, competitive player. After the catch, he's going to make a lot of guys miss and grind out tough yards. He's a chain mover, kind of has that mentality about him, but he's really limited upside wise. You mentioned the deep target stuff. It's hard to find actual deep route wins. I think even the deep balls he did catch were like a deep over route where there was a miscomm on the back end and he catches it for 30 yards. You know, it's like, it's nothing crazy. It's really, he's even more limited than JSN was from a resume standpoint on tape with the deep stuff. So that said, there's some nice qualities about Egbuka. I mentioned the run after catch stuff. He is a uniquely special catch radius for a slot only type player. His body control is really nice. He can contort in the air. He puts his body on the line. He's really good in congested areas, which again, if you're going to be a primary slot receiver in the NFL, I like the idea of you being good in congested areas, right? Because that's where you're going to do a lot of your damage. He handles contact very well, doesn't get separated from the football too much. And then I kind of labeled him in my prospect write-up of him as a zone coverage dismantler. So he's not a guy you're going to bring in to go beat man, kind of like Rashee Rice. I'm going to stick with this comp. But against zone, he is a really, really good knack for finding the soft spot, working into open areas, making sure his quarterback sees his numbers and kind of setting his routes down. And then once he gets the ball in his hands, he's an effective player. So he is an average athlete, though. He doesn't really have any route running chops. There's no salesmanship to his game. He's not going to hit you with the double move. Doesn't have a lot of juice athletically either, kind of limited from a top speed standpoint. Not a big vert guy either. I think he's more quick than fast, but he's still not very quick either. Just kind of an all-around solid receiver, but he's never gonna be a wide receiver one in the NFL, at least not on a good team.
Yeah, and I just was analytically based on when I'm looking at, didn't really impress me with the Yak. It was you remove screens from the equation, which is an advantage. He was really barely above the class average for yards after the catch per reception. But yeah, I mean, so underwhelmed. not that excited about him, I would say, but draft capital is really the most important part of the equation. And you could have, I talk about this where it's like, I wonder if you just took like a clone or identical twins, right? Exactly the same person. One triplets. One goes in round one goes in round 5, one goes round 7. And it could be the case where it's the same guy. One becomes a Pro Bowler, one is out of the league in 2 years. The other is just like a middling, barely not fantasy relevant wide receiver 3. I mean, like look at and like landing spot obviously is so important. Look at Puka Nakua. What would have happened if he went anywhere else? Or imagine if Marvin Harrison Jr. last year went to the Jaguars and said maybe he would have had a much more productive season. But like this is especially true with slot wide receiver and like draft capital. It's when you have that investment in a player, you want them to be successful. You want them to look good. They get more opportunities, not just to be successful, but you overlook their failures and mistakes and you set them up to be successful. So yeah, draft capital is really important. He's supposedly going to get round 1 draft capital.
No, he's not. He's not.
No, he's not. Okay.
I would be shocked if a team took him
Okay.
in the first round.
Okay. Well, either way, round 2 draft capital, really strong for a slot wide receiver. That's going to be good. That'll probably boost him up in my model. But for slot wide receivers in particular, landing spot is so massively important. It's like, you want to be on a team that, either you're playing in 2 wide receiver sets or the team lives out of 11 personnel. That's so, or it's like, hey, if he goes to Denver and we hear Sean Payton invoke the term Joker, or like even just mention Michael Thomas as a possible comp, immediately following their decision to draft him and their post-draft press conference, then wheels up. Then I'm really, really excited. But just
wild hypotheticals here.
But in a vacuum, pre-draft, I have to say, not very excited.
Yeah. So for me, just this kind of also encapsulates where this wide receiver class is. I said everything I said about Egbuka, and he still scores as my wide receiver 7. And I have like a day 2 grade on him.
I mean, 7's low versus consensus.
Okay, well,
they're wrong.
I'm not saying they're wrong or right. I like Egbuka as a nice high floor player. But yeah, I'm not round 1 way out on that. And then
So I'm seeing right now industry consensus.
I'm telling you they're wrong.
I know. I'm just letting the people know. Right now he's consensus wide receiver 3, pick 28.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think you're right. The one thing I will say is you're looking at this from more of an NFL standpoint. And from a fantasy standpoint, it's an archetype that plays better in fantasy than NFL because you have some of that PPR cheat code upside, possession guy. But
yeah, but he's like, so name guys like that have worked.
I know
he's super low end of that. This isn't Cooper Kupp. This isn't. This is closer to a big Wan'Dale Robinson than it is those other.
I
guys.
know, and you remove the deep element. Like you saw that on film.
Oh
and
yeah.
So yeah, you remove that you really don't have much upside beyond that. And so to me, he's just like a guy who gets you the 8 to 14 PPR every week, but like the standard deviation is so low that it's just like, okay, he's dependable, but like barely not worth having in your starting lineup.
Yeah, like
so it doesn't really mean anything.
In a start 13 dynasty league, we're in one of those, by the way, Scott.
Yeah.
Maybe he hits your lineup, but yeah, that's so. Anyways, yeah, NFL perspective, I think I like him a little bit more than fantasy for sure. So for dynasty,
another perk, he's probably very NFL ready, just like all these Brian Hartline guys, right?
For sure, that is very true. Very true.
Well, that's what you said. You said super high floor, but like the floor is touching the ceiling.
Yes, they're basically the same thing at this point.
Yeah.
Whatever he is on day 1 in an NFL uniform, that's probably what he's going to be his whole career.
And that's going to be true from like a weekly fantasy perspective. If at least I'm right, it's just like the floor and the ceiling. It's just 12 points every single week.
All right. So for dynasty drafts, Scott, I mean, let's play devil's advocate. We're doing hypotheticals. Apparently let's say he goes in the 40s somewhere in the real draft.
Okay.
He gets like mid round 2 capital. Where you think he's still a mid to late to early third round pick for me in Dynasty, just because I don't see the ceiling with him unless I'm drafting with sharps and all my guys go. I don't know.
Well, this is the thing is, so I'm waiting on your prospect guide to drop. I think by the time this gets posted, it's probably up. But so I don't know officially where he checks in for me. I don't like this class. It's possible he's fairly high up, wide receiver 3 projected draft capital, but it still goes back to that same thing we've been saying is like, well, I still don't want it because this running back class is so sexy. We said, Warren and Loveland might be my wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 in this class. And so I'm just probably not going to draft him. I'm just going to have a running back. But I did say there are a few key spots, and it's not capital as much as spots where, like I said, I think Denver is an amazing landing spot. We've heard Sean Payton for years say, I need a joker. I need a Michael Thomas. I need a Jimmy Graham. I need an Alvin Kamara. We need someone to do damage over the middle of the field. And maybe that's it.
I don't think that's what Sean means when he says joker, brother. Sean wants an extraordinarily gifted, multifaceted player.
Right.
That is not what Egbuka is.
Okay. Okay.
So
maybe even that.
There are spots though. What about I was gonna say 42 to the Jets, but then you have the QB situation, so that's a no-go. Dude, it's rough out there, bro.
I know.
I don't know.
I mean, Patriots, just because they have no one else.
Yeah.
At
right.
38.
Say they pass on a receiver in the first round and go Egbuka at 38. That might be there you go. That's the spot. That's the nut spot for him. New England at
Titans, because they have no one else. I know quarterback play is sus, but
they're taking a QB first overall.
Yeah, but then 35.
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, this is just what we're doing with the wide receivers, apparently, is underwhelming. Sorry. I mean, hey, the dynasty community, the fantasy community is really excited about this player. Unfortunately, neither of us are.
Yeah, thankfully for you and I, we still have 4 receivers we're going to talk about in coming episodes that I actually like. So I'll be way more optimistic on those guys, and then we can pour water on it after that. So, all right. Let's get out here. That's going to do it. Hey, if you're interested by the things you hear today, be sure to check out the Fantasy Points YouTube channel, subscribe, and turn notifications on. Also, over at fantasypoints.com, by now, you can get the 2025 prospect guide, hopefully. It's supposed to be out today. In fact, we're recording this on a Thursday. Scott Barrett's model articles are also dropping throughout between now and the draft. The tight end one's up. Wide receiver one is almost ready. Then we'll be on to running backs. Be sure to check those out. All the cool data points and model type discussions you hear on this show, you'll get out of that article as well, and probably a lot more detail as well. So be sure to check those out. That's going to do it for us. We will be back next with Matthew Golden and Isaiah Bond.